Hello. This is Moonlit Inc. BL. Let the story begin. Chapter 1, The Man Everyone Fears. The Whitmore Group headquarters rose above Sydney's CBD like a blade of glass and steel, sharp-edged and unapologetic. Its mirrored surface reflected the pale morning sky and the distant shimmer of the harbor, as if the building itself refused to look inward. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished marble, espresso, and quiet anxiety. Jacob Adams stood just beyond the revolving doors, adjusting his grip on a slim leather folder. He took a slow breath, not because he was late, he wasn't, nor because he was unprepared, he never was, but because the name Carlyle Whitmore seemed to weigh more than the building itself. Not a dragon, Jacob reminded himself. Just a man. Everyone said that, too. Usually right before listing all the reasons it wasn't true. He stepped inside. The reception area hummed with controlled efficiency. Phones rang softly. Keyboards clicked. Conversations stayed low, clipped, careful. Jacob caught the way people straightened when an elevator chimed, the way eyes flicked up instinctively, fear disguised as professionalism. First day, the receptionist asked, her smile polite but tight. Jacob nodded. Jacob Adams. Executive Secretary. Something flickered across her face, sympathy, maybe. Or pity. Top floor, she said, handing him a security pass. Good luck. The elevator ride was silent, save for the faint whir of cables and Jacob's own thoughts. He'd read Carlyle Whitmore's profile dozens of times. Young for a CEO. Ruthless. Brilliant. Impossible to please. Assistants didn't last, burnout, tears, abrupt resignations. One rumor claimed the last secretary quit halfway through a sentence. The doors slid open. The executive floor was quieter than the rest of the building, almost eerily so. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the corridor with morning light. Sydney stretched endlessly beyond the glass, harbor blue, sunlit rooftops, ferries cutting clean white lines through water. Jacob followed the signs to the corner office. Carlyle Whitmore's office door was already open. Inside, the man himself stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, posture rigid as if carved from the skyline he overlooked. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, no unnecessary folds, no softness anywhere. Even his dark hair was precisely styled, not a strand out of place. Yes, Carlyle said sharply, his voice cool and controlled. I've read the report. That doesn't excuse the error. Jacob paused at the threshold, instinctively still. No, I don't care how late it was, Carlyle continued. Fix it. Now. The call ended. Silence snapped into place. Carlyle turned. His gaze landed on Jacob with surgical precision, cool gray eyes that missed nothing. Jacob felt the weight of it immediately, like being assessed, measured, and judged in a single second. You're late, Carlyle said. Jacob checked his watch without panic. I'm 3 minutes early, sir. A pause. Carlyle glanced at the wall clock. Then back at Jacob. Something unreadable passed through his eyes, annoyance, perhaps, at being corrected. Or surprise that Jacob had done so calmly. Name, Carlyle said. Jacob Adams. Your new secretary. Another pause, longer this time. Fine, Carlyle replied, already turning back toward his desk. Put your things down. You'll find my schedule on the tablet. Memorize it. Jacob stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The office was immaculate, sleek desk, neatly stacked files, no personal photos. The kind of space designed for productivity, not comfort. As Jacob set his folder down, Carlyle continued speaking, not looking at him. I don't repeat instructions. I don't tolerate mistakes. If you can't keep up, you won't last. Understood? Yes, sir. Jacob's voice didn't waver. He wasn't trying to be brave, he simply saw no reason to sound afraid. Fear made people sloppy. Calm made them useful. Carlyle finally looked at him again. Most people fidgeted under his stare. Apologized. Over-explained. Jacob simply stood there, attentive, waiting. Interesting, Carlyle thought before he could stop himself. He dismissed the thought immediately. Coffee, Carlyle said. Black. No sugar. Jacob nodded once. Already noted. He left the office quietly. Carlyle sat down, frowning at his screen. He told himself the faint easing in his shoulders meant nothing. Just coincidence. Just efficiency. Outside, Jacob exhaled slowly as he walked toward the break room. So that's him, he thought. Not a dragon. Just, very alone. He didn't know why the thought stayed with him as he brewed the coffee, measuring precisely, timing it just right. He delivered it exactly 6 minutes later, setting the cup down on Carlyle's desk without a word. Carlyle glanced at it. Then at the time. Perfect. He took a sip, and frowned again, unsettled by how, for the first time that morning, nothing was wrong. He didn't thank Jacob. But as Jacob returned to his desk, Carlyle found his eyes drifting to the open doorway more than once, irritation replaced by something unfamiliar and unwelcome. Silence. Order. And a quiet presence he hadn't realized the office had been missing. Chapter 2, The Secretary Who Doesn't Flinch. By the third day, the office had begun to notice. It wasn't anything dramatic, no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no public displays of fury that usually marked the end of a secretary's tenure. Instead, there was something far more unsettling. Carlyle Whitmore was quiet. Not silent, he still issued commands with crisp precision, still dissected reports and corrected errors with ruthless clarity, but the sharp explosions of temper were conspicuously absent. People exchanged glances during meetings, brows knitting in shared confusion. Something in the air had shifted, subtle as a tide turning. At the center of it all sat Jacob Adams. Jacob's desk was positioned just outside Carlyle's office, a clean extension of the CEO's controlled world. He organized without fuss, his movements economical and smooth. When Carlyle spoke, Jacob listened. When Carlyle paused, Jacob waited. There was no frantic scrambling, no nervous chatter, just steady competence. Carlyle noticed. He told himself it was impossible not to. Mr. Adams, Carlyle said from inside his office, not raising his voice. Jacob looked up immediately. Yes, sir. The Davidson briefing. Move it to 11. Inform legal and marketing. It's already been moved, Jacob replied calmly. Legal confirmed. Marketing asked for the updated slides, I sent them an hour ago. Carlyle's fingers stilled above his keyboard. An hour ago, he repeated. Jacob met his gaze, unbothered. Based on yesterday's meeting, I anticipated the change. For a fleeting moment, Carlyle felt something dangerously close to relief. He masked it with a nod. Fine. Jacob returned to his work. Carlyle frowned at his screen, irritation flaring, not at Jacob, but at himself. He hated surprises. Yet this one had removed a problem before it existed. No explanations. No groveling. Just quiet efficiency. Don't get used to it, he warned himself. The day unraveled with its usual relentless pace, calls stacking on calls, negotiations tightening, numbers refusing to align the way they should. Normally, by mid-afternoon, Carlyle's patience would have worn thin. But every time tension coiled in his chest, Jacob was there. A neatly annotated file placed beside him without a word. A meeting reminder delivered exactly when Carlyle needed it, not a minute sooner, not a second late. A glass of water when Carlyle realized he hadn't taken a sip all day. It unsettled him. You don't hover, Carlyle remarked abruptly as Jacob handed him a document. Jacob blinked once. Is that a complaint, sir? No, Carlyle said, sharper than intended. It's an observation. Jacob considered this. My previous employer preferred autonomy, he replied. I learned that some people work better without someone breathing down their neck. Carlyle's mouth tightened. He's implying something. Careful, Carlyle warned. Jacob's expression remained neutral, but his voice stayed steady. Noted. And that was that. There was no argument. No retreat. No defensive explanation. Jacob simply absorbed the warning and moved on, unshaken. Carlyle watched him leave, unease curling low in his gut. People usually reacted to him: fear, resentment, ambition. Jacob did none of it. He existed beside Carlyle rather than beneath him, and that subtle distinction irritated Carlyle more than open defiance ever could. Late afternoon bled into evening, sunlight slanting golden through the windows overlooking Sydney Harbor. Carlyle rubbed his temple, eyes burning from hours of screen glare. A knock. Yes, Carlyle said. Jacob entered, carrying a tablet. Your 6 p.m. call has been pushed to tomorrow. The board member is delayed in Melbourne. Of course he is, Carlyle muttered. Jacob hesitated. You've been in meetings since 7. Would you like me to reschedule dinner as well? Carlyle looked up sharply. I didn't say I had dinner plans. No, Jacob said gently. But you usually order from the same place around this time. That gave Carlyle pause. He searched Jacob's face for mockery or presumption and found neither. Just observation. Pattern recognition. Care. I'll decide later, Carlyle said. Jacob nodded. I'll leave the option open. As he turned to go, Carlyle spoke without thinking. You don't seem intimidated. Jacob stopped. He didn't turn immediately, as if considering whether the question deserved an answer. Finally, he faced Carlyle again. I respect your position, Jacob said carefully. But intimidation doesn't make me work better. The honesty of it landed harder than any flattery. Carlyle leaned back in his chair, studying him. Most people would disagree. Jacob's lips curved into the faintest smile, not amused, not mocking. Just, human. Most people aren't me. Something in Carlyle's chest shifted, subtle and unwelcome. Get back to work, Carlyle said curtly. Yes, sir. When Jacob left, Carlyle stared at the closed door longer than necessary. He doesn't flinch, Carlyle realized. Not at raised voices. Not at authority. Not even at Carlyle himself. And for reasons Carlyle couldn't yet articulate, that steadiness felt less like a challenge and more like an anchor, one he hadn't known he'd been searching for in the endless churn of power, pressure, and expectations. Outside, Jacob returned to his desk, fingers flying across the keyboard. He felt the eyes of co-workers on him, the unspoken question hanging in the air. How long will this one last? Jacob didn't look back. He wasn't here to survive Carlyle Whitmore. He was here to work. And if, in doing so, he could bring a little calm into a space ruled by sharp edges and silence. Well. That, too, was part of the job. Chapter 3, Late Nights Overlooking Sydney Harbor. By the end of the week, the building no longer emptied at dusk. A looming merger had turned the Whitmore Group into a hive that refused to sleep. Lights burned late across multiple floors, but the brightest glow came from the executive level, where Carlyle Whitmore stood at the center of controlled chaos. The sky outside his office windows deepened from pale blue to bruised violet, then to a velvet black scattered with city lights. Sydney Harbor shimmered below, ferries tracing slow, luminous paths across the water. Normally, Carlyle would have ignored the view entirely, another distraction, another indulgence. Tonight, he noticed it. Legal is pushing back on Clause 14, Carlyle said, pacing behind his desk, jacket discarded over a chair. They're nervous about liability exposure. Jacob sat at the small conference table, tablet balanced on one knee, posture relaxed but alert. They always are, he replied mildly. Finance already flagged that clause as non-negotiable. Carlyle stopped mid-step. You spoke to finance? This afternoon, Jacob said. I anticipated legal's concern and wanted to confirm where the line was before it became an argument. Carlyle stared at him. When did he have time? Carlyle wondered. The day had been a blur of meetings and calls, every minute accounted for. And? Carlyle asked. They'll back you, Jacob said simply. As long as the revised language comes from legal first. It saves face. Carlyle exhaled slowly. Send legal a revised draft with that note. Already done, Jacob replied. They're reviewing it now. Silence filled the room. Carlyle turned back to the window, jaw tight. This was getting out of hand. He didn't like reliance, on systems, on people, on anything that could fail him. And yet, without realizing when it happened, he had begun to move through his day assuming Jacob would be there to catch the details he no longer had to hold alone. That's dangerous, he told himself. The clock crept past 8. The office floor outside had emptied, the usual daytime hum replaced by a low, distant silence broken only by the occasional murmur of late-night staff and the soft whir of air conditioning. Jacob remained, jacket still neatly draped over his chair, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal his forearms as he typed. You can go home, Carlyle said abruptly. Jacob glanced up. The merger documents still need cross-checking. I'll manage. Jacob studied him for a moment. You've said that before. Carlyle bristled. Are you questioning my capability? No, Jacob replied calmly. I'm questioning your workload. The nerve of it. And yet Carlyle found he couldn't summon the anger. Instead, something close to exhaustion pressed behind his eyes. Fine, Carlyle said. Stay. But don't get in the way. Jacob's mouth curved slightly. I never do. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Papers shifted. Keys clicked. Outside, the harbor lights glittered like scattered coins. At some point, Carlyle realized he'd loosened his tie. Then, without conscious thought, he removed it altogether, tossing it onto the desk. The top button of his shirt came undone. He froze, aware of the movement only after it was done. When was the last time I did that at work? He glanced at Jacob, expecting to find him watching. Jacob wasn't. He was focused entirely on the tablet in his hands, brows drawn together in concentration, lips moving faintly as he read. The lack of attention unsettled Carlyle more than scrutiny would have. Jacob, Carlyle said suddenly. Yes. Jacob looked up immediately. How long do you plan to stay in this position? Jacob blinked, clearly surprised by the question. As long as I'm useful. That's not an answer. Jacob considered this, eyes drifting briefly to the window before returning to Carlyle. I prefer roles where I can make a difference without being the loudest person in the room. Carlyle scoffed. This isn't exactly a quiet job. No, Jacob agreed. But it's a controlled one. Something in his tone made Carlyle look at him more closely. Why here? Carlyle asked. You could work anywhere. Jacob hesitated. It was the first time Carlyle had seen him do so. My last position ended, badly, Jacob admitted. I wanted a place where expectations were clear. Where structure mattered. Carlyle understood that more than he wanted to admit. Order has its advantages, Carlyle said. And its costs, Jacob replied gently. Their gazes held, something unspoken passing between them. Understanding, perhaps. Or recognition. A growl cut through the silence. Carlyle stiffened, mortified, as his stomach betrayed him. Jacob looked down at his watch. You skipped dinner. That's irrelevant. Jacob stood. I'll order something. I didn't ask. Too bad, Jacob said mildly, already moving toward the door. You're useless when you're starving. Carlyle stared after him, incredulous. No one spoke to him like that. And yet, when Jacob returned 20 minutes later with 2 paper bags and a faint scent of fried rice and ginger, Carlyle found he didn't object. They ate at the conference table, the city sprawling beneath them. No phones. No tablets. Just food and the low hum of the city outside. This is good, Carlyle admitted reluctantly. Jacob smiled. You order it often. I don't eat it often. Jacob tilted his head. You should. Carlyle huffed out a quiet laugh before he could stop himself. The sound surprised them both. Later, as the night wore on and the workload finally thinned, Carlyle realized something unsettling. He wasn't tense. The office felt different, not silent and oppressive, but calm. Shared. Human. As Jacob gathered the remaining documents, Carlyle watched him from across the room, an unfamiliar warmth settling in his chest. This is a mistake, Carlyle thought. But as the harbor lights reflected in the glass and Jacob quietly shut down his tablet, Carlyle knew one thing with unsettling clarity. He didn't want the nights like this to end. Chapter 4, Cracks in the Corporate Armor. The mistake was small. Insignificant, really, an incorrect figure buried deep in a financial forecast, already corrected in the revised documents Jacob had circulated that morning. Under normal circumstances, it would have warranted nothing more than a clipped comment and a quiet fix. But nothing about the morning was normal. Carlyle had slept poorly. The merger pressure was mounting. The board was restless. And the moment he saw the slide projected onto the conference room screen, with the wrong number glaring back at him, something inside him snapped. This, Carlyle said sharply, standing as his chair scraped back against the polished floor, is unacceptable. The room froze. Executives stiffened around the table, eyes darting between Carlyle and the trembling junior analyst who'd been tasked with compiling the preliminary data. I asked for accuracy, Carlyle continued, voice cutting clean and cold. Not guesswork. Do you have any idea how this reflects on us? I'm sorry, sir, the analyst stammered. The updated file. Excuses, Carlyle snapped. If you can't handle basic competence, perhaps you're in the wrong. Carlyle. The interruption was soft. Too soft to be ignored. Every head turned. Jacob stood near the back of the room, tablet tucked under his arm, posture straight but relaxed. His voice hadn't risen. It hadn't challenged. It had simply anchored. The corrected figure is already in the final deck, Jacob continued evenly. This version was flagged as preliminary. I circulated the update at 9:15. Carlyle's jaw tightened. That doesn't change the fact that it made it onto the screen, Carlyle said. No, Jacob agreed. But it does change whose responsibility it is. The room went deathly still. Jacob turned slightly toward the analyst. You followed the instructions you were given. Thank you. The analyst blinked, stunned. Then Jacob faced Carlyle again, not defiant, not afraid. Just steady. If you'd like, Jacob said, we can take 5 minutes to reset before continuing. 5 minutes. No one had ever suggested that to Carlyle Whitmore. Carlyle's first instinct was fury. The audacity of it. The implication that he needed time to cool down. But beneath that instinct was something else. Embarrassment. He saw it then, the pale faces around the table, the tight shoulders, the way his anger had filled the room like smoke. He'd crossed a line. Not strategically. Not productively. Emotionally. Carlyle exhaled sharply through his nose. Everyone out, he said curtly. 10-minute break. Chairs scraped back. People filed out quickly, relief evident in their hurried steps. The analyst lingered just long enough to murmur a quiet, "Thank you," to Jacob before disappearing down the hall. The door closed. Silence. Carlyle turned on Jacob. "You undermined me." Jacob met his gaze. "I redirected the situation." "That's not your place." "No," Jacob said calmly. "But it is my job to keep meetings on track." Carlyle stared at him, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You don't get to decide when I'm out of line." Jacob didn't flinch. "I didn't," he replied. "I decided when the room was." The words landed with quiet finality. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Carlyle laughed, once, sharp and humorless. "Do you have any idea how replaceable you are?" Carlyle asked. Jacob's expression softened, not with fear, but with understanding. "Yes," he said simply. "That's why I try to be useful." The tension shifted. Not gone, but transformed. Carlyle turned away, hands braced against the conference table. His reflection stared back at him in the darkened window, jaw tight, shoulders rigid, eyes burning with a pressure he'd learned long ago not to name. "I don't need defending," Carlyle muttered. "I know," Jacob said quietly behind him. "You don't need fearing either." Carlyle closed his eyes. The word struck deeper than any accusation. Later that afternoon, Carlyle passed the break room on his way back to his office. Voices drifted through the partially open door. "I thought we were done for," someone whispered. He was about to tear him apart. Jacob stepped in. "Yeah, but he didn't make it worse. He actually helped." Carlyle paused without meaning to. "I don't know how he does it," another voice said. "It's like he understands him." Carlyle moved on before he could hear more, irritation prickling at his skin. "They don't understand anything," he told himself. And yet. Back in his office, he found Jacob at his desk, typing steadily, the same calm presence as always. No smugness. No triumph. "Jacob," Carlyle said. "Yes, sir." Carlyle hesitated. The apology sat heavy and unfamiliar on his tongue. "That won't happen again," he said finally. Jacob looked up, surprise flickering briefly across his face. Then he nodded. "Thank you." Carlyle lingered in the doorway, unsettled by the way the tightness in his chest eased at those two simple words. For the first time in a long while, someone hadn't excused his behavior. They'd understood it. And somehow, that frightened him more than anger ever had. Chapter 5, The Man Beneath the Title. The charity gala was a necessary inconvenience. That was how Carlyle Whitmore framed it to himself as his driver navigated the streets of Darling Harbor, city lights blurring past the tinted windows. The Whitmore Group's name was splashed across the invitation in elegant script, expectations attached like invisible chains. Appear, smile, donate generously, network efficiently. Then leave. Simple. Except Carlyle hadn't attended an event like this in years without a carefully curated entourage, PR, legal, board members, buffers between him and the world. Tonight, there was only Jacob. Jacob sat beside him in the back seat, hands folded loosely in his lap, posture relaxed in a way Carlyle found both reassuring and inexplicably distracting. He wore a tailored navy suit, less severe than Carlyle's black, but no less precise. The tie was understated. The overall effect was quietly striking. When did I start noticing this? Carlyle wondered irritably. You don't have to stay the whole night, Carlyle said, breaking the silence. Your presence is optional. Jacob turned toward him. So is yours. Carlyle huffed. I'm expected. And I'm useful, Jacob replied. You work better when you're not bracing for impact. Carlyle eyed him. You make it sound like I'm walking into a battlefield. Jacob smiled faintly. You tense like you are. The car slowed to a stop. The moment the doors opened, the noise rushed in, laughter, music, the murmur of Sydney's elite gathered beneath strings of warm lights. Cameras flashed. Someone called Carlyle's name. Carlyle's shoulders squared instinctively. Jacob noticed. "Breathe," he said quietly. Carlyle shot him a look. "I know how to function in public." "I know," Jacob said. "This is about comfort, not competence." The distinction irritated Carlyle because it was accurate. Inside, the space glowed with gold and glass, the harbor visible beyond sweeping windows. Champagne flutes clinked. Names and titles flowed like currency. Carlyle. A board member clasped his shoulder. "Glad you could make it." "Obligatory," Carlyle replied smoothly. Jacob stayed half a step behind him, not hidden, but not intrusive. He intercepted questions, smoothed transitions, redirected conversations with gentle efficiency. Carlyle found himself breathing easier, his usual defensive edge dulling as the evening unfolded. "You seem different tonight," one donor remarked, studying Carlyle over her glass. "More approachable." Carlyle stiffened. "Is that a complaint?" She laughed. "Hardly." Jacob caught Carlyle's eye and lifted an eyebrow ever so slightly. Traitor, Carlyle thought, but the irritation lacked its usual bite. Later, they escaped to the balcony overlooking the harbor, the music muffled behind them. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt and the distant hum of the city. Carlyle loosened his cufflinks, a gesture he barely registered until Jacob noticed. "You're doing well," Jacob said. "At pretending," Carlyle replied. "At being human," Jacob corrected gently. Carlyle leaned against the railing, the city stretching endlessly below. For once, the weight of expectation felt lighter. "They expect certainty," Carlyle said quietly. "Confidence. Control. No cracks. And you give them that," Jacob said. "But they never ask what it costs," Carlyle continued. "Or what it takes." Jacob didn't interrupt. "I learned early that mistakes weren't tolerated," Carlyle said. "Not at home. Not in school. Not anywhere that mattered." His reflection shimmered in the dark glass, older than he felt, younger than he was allowed to be. Perfection became survival. Jacob's voice was soft. "And now?" Carlyle swallowed. "Now I don't know how to stop." Jacob turned fully toward him. "You don't have to stop. You just don't have to do it alone." The word settled deep, echoing in a place Carlyle kept locked down. A laugh drifted from inside the ballroom, followed by music swelling again. The world continued, oblivious. "Why don't you try leaving early?" Jacob suggested. "Just tonight." Carlyle hesitated. Then, to his own surprise, he nodded. They slipped away without ceremony. In the car ride back, silence stretched comfortably between them, the harbor lights fading behind. Carlyle stared out the window, something uncoiling slowly in his chest. "Jacob," he said. "Yes." "Thank you," Carlyle said. The words felt strange. Necessary. Jacob smiled, genuine and warm. "Anytime." As the car pulled away, Carlyle realized something that unsettled him far more than the gala ever could have. Tonight, for the first time in years, he hadn't been Carlyle Whitmore, CEO. He'd just been a man. And Jacob had seen him anyway. Chapter 6, Lines begin to blur. The change didn't announce itself. It crept in quietly, disguised as routine. Carlyle began noticing the smaller things first, the moments so subtle they slipped past conscious thought. How his eyes flicked automatically to Jacob's desk when he stepped off the elevator each morning. How his irritation softened when Jacob spoke, even if the message itself was inconvenient. How the office felt, wrong on the rare occasions Jacob stepped away for lunch or errands. Unbalanced. You didn't eat again. Carlyle looked up from his screen, irritated until he saw Jacob standing in the doorway, holding a small paper bag. I had coffee, Carlyle replied. That's not food. It's sufficient. Jacob set the bag down anyway. Sandwich. No onions. You don't like them. Carlyle frowned. I never said that. You always pick them out. A pause. Carlyle stared at the bag, then at Jacob. You watch too much. Jacob shrugged lightly. It's part of the job. Since when did my job include being cared for? Carlyle thought, but he opened the bag anyway. The sandwich was still warm. He ate half of it before realizing what he was doing. Across the office, people noticed too. Did he just ask if Jacob was okay? Someone whispered near the printer. He told him to go home early yesterday. He smiled. I didn't know he could do that. Jacob pretended not to hear, but the whispers followed him like a shadow. He felt them settle uncomfortably between his shoulder blades. This is dangerous, he thought. It was one thing to be competent. Another to be favored. Jacob. He looked up instantly. Yes, sir. You're quiet today. The comment startled them both. Jacob blinked. Am I? Yes. Carlyle frowned. You usually correct me by now. Jacob smiled faintly, but there was tension beneath it. I try not to make a habit of that. Carlyle studied him, noticing the faint shadows under his eyes, the tightness in his jaw. You're exhausted, Carlyle said. I'm fine. That wasn't a suggestion, Carlyle replied, already standing. Go home. Jacob stared. There's still. I'll handle it. The words echoed, his words, thrown back at him. Jacob hesitated. You don't like being alone with unfinished work. Carlyle stiffened. You know me too well. Tonight, Carlyle said, voice quieter, I don't want you exhausted tomorrow. Something in Jacob's expression softened, and something else hardened. Yes, sir, he said carefully. That night, Jacob lay awake longer than he should have, staring at the ceiling of his apartment, Carlyle's voice replaying in his head. Concern. Familiarity. Care. None of it had been asked for. None of it felt professional anymore. The next day, Jacob arrived earlier than usual. He needed distance. Structure. Control. But the moment Carlyle stepped out of the elevator and their eyes met, the distance collapsed. You're early, Carlyle said. So are you. Carlyle's lips curved into something dangerously close to a smile. The rest of the day unraveled around them in glances held too long, silences waited with unspoken things. When Jacob leaned over Carlyle's desk to point out a discrepancy, Carlyle became acutely aware of the warmth at his side, the faint scent of Jacob's cologne. He didn't move away. Jacob noticed. This has to stop, Jacob thought, heart pounding. Late afternoon, a meeting ran long. By the time they returned to Carlyle's office, the sun was already dipping low, bathing the room in amber light. You should leave, Jacob said abruptly. Carlyle looked up. What? This, Jacob gestured vaguely between them, is crossing lines. Carlyle stood slowly. Is it? Yes, Jacob said, voice tight. People are talking. You're different with me. And you're uncomfortable? Carlyle asked quietly. Jacob hesitated. No, he admitted. That's the problem. The honesty hung heavy in the air. Carlyle took a step closer before he could stop himself. Then another. He stopped just short of Jacob's space. I don't do this, Carlyle said. I don't blur lines. I don't lose control. Jacob met his gaze, pulse racing. Then maybe you should step back. Carlyle searched his face, frustration warring with something far more dangerous. Want. He exhaled sharply and turned away. You're right, he said. This ends here. Jacob nodded, relief and disappointment tangling painfully in his chest. Yes, sir. They returned to their roles with practiced ease, CEO and secretary, authority and efficiency, distance restored. But the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full. And both of them knew, with a certainty that frightened them more than any corporate risk. Once a line had been seen, it could never truly disappear. Chapter 7, The Fear of Wanting More. The distance was immediate. Not dramatic, no slammed doors, no sharp words, but precise, intentional, and devastating in its subtlety. Jacob became efficient in a way that was almost clinical. His voice stayed polite. His posture stayed perfect. He no longer lingered in Carlyle's doorway or filled silences with quiet observations. He did his job, and nothing more. Carlyle felt it like a missing limb. Your afternoon has been cleared, Jacob said one morning, eyes on his tablet. The client postponed. Fine, Carlyle replied. Jacob nodded and turned back to his desk. That was it. No comment about Carlyle skipping lunch. No reminder to stretch the meeting buffer. No calm presence easing the relentless press of the day. The office felt colder. Carlyle snapped more easily, not explosively, but sharply, words honed to precision blades. People noticed. Whispers returned. He's back to normal. Guess it didn't last. Carlyle hated that they were right. By Thursday evening, the tension coiled tight enough to snap. Jacob stood in Carlyle's office, resignation letter folded neatly in his hand. I'll finish the week, Jacob said evenly. HR already has a copy. Carlyle looked up slowly, disbelief flashing hot and immediate. You're quitting? Yes. Why? Jacob inhaled once. Steadied himself. Because I misjudged the situation. Carlyle stood abruptly. You're good at your job. This isn't about competence. Then what? This, Jacob said quietly, finally meeting Carlyle's gaze. Us. The word hit like a blow. There is no us, Carlyle said automatically. Jacob smiled sadly. Exactly. Carlyle crossed the room in 2 long strides. You think resigning fixes that? It restores boundaries, Jacob replied. Ones I failed to maintain. Carlyle stared at him, chest tight. You're leaving. The thought echoed louder than any boardroom confrontation. When were you planning to tell me? Carlyle demanded. I am telling you. After making the decision without me. Jacob's jaw tightened. You're my employer, not my. Don't, Carlyle snapped, then stopped himself, voice lowering. Don't reduce this to hierarchy. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. You said this ends here, Jacob reminded him softly. Carlyle turned away, hands clenched at his sides. He had meant it then. He'd meant to regain control, to shove the dangerous wanting back into its carefully locked place. But control felt hollow now. The office lights reflected in the window, the harbor dark beyond. Carlyle stared at his own reflection, tailored suit, immaculate posture, a man who had everything except the one thing he hadn't known he needed. Stay, Carlyle said. Jacob blinked. Sir. Not as my secretary, Carlyle said hoarsely. Stay while we figure this out. Jacob shook his head. That's not fair. To either of us. Carlyle turned back, eyes sharp with something dangerously close to desperation. I don't know how to want things halfway, he admitted. I either shut it down or let it consume me. Jacob's breath caught. That's what scares me, Jacob said. You don't do soft. Carlyle took a step closer. Then stopped. I can learn. The words felt foreign. Exposed. Jacob's voice softened despite himself. Carlyle. No, Carlyle said. Let me say this. He swallowed. I have built my life on control because it was the only way to survive. You didn't break that. You showed me what happens when I loosen it. Jacob's eyes burned. And now? Jacob whispered. Now, Carlyle said, voice steady despite the storm inside him, the thought of losing you terrifies me more than losing control ever did. The confession hung between them, raw, unpolished, terrifyingly sincere. Jacob closed his eyes briefly. This is what I was afraid of, he thought. And what I wanted anyway. I don't want to be your escape, Jacob said. Or your weakness. You're not, Carlyle replied immediately. You're my equal. Jacob let out a shaky breath. Then don't ask me to stay out of fear, he said. Ask me because you choose me. Carlyle didn't hesitate. Stay, he said. Because I want you. Not the efficiency. Not the calm. You. Jacob's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Slowly, he unfolded the letter. Looked at it. Then tore it cleanly in half. All right, Jacob said quietly. But we take this slowly. Carlyle nodded once. I don't know how. Jacob smiled, soft and real. Then I'll teach you. The city hummed outside, indifferent and alive. For the first time in his life, Carlyle Whitmore stepped into uncertainty not as a CEO managing risk, but as a man choosing love, knowing full well it could ruin him. And wanting it anyway. Chapter 8, From CEO to Doting Lover. Sydney slowed at dusk. The city softened as the sun dipped low, gilding the harbor in molten gold and setting the glass towers aglow with warm reflections. From the balcony of Carlyle Whitmore's penthouse, an immaculate space rarely used for anything beyond silent contemplation, the world looked distant and manageable. Carlyle leaned against the railing, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up in a way he would once have considered careless. The evening breeze tugged gently at his hair. Behind him, the door slid open. Jacob stepped out. He paused, taking in the view, then Carlyle, really looking at him, as if seeing this version for the first time. You never said you lived this high, Jacob said lightly. I don't invite people here, Carlyle replied. The implication lingered. Jacob joined him at the railing, their shoulders almost touching. The space between them felt charged, not with tension this time, but possibility. So, Jacob said, breaking the silence, what does taking it slowly look like for someone who schedules his life in 15-minute blocks? Carlyle huffed softly. Uncomfortable. Jacob smiled. Honest. They stood there as the sky deepened, fairy lights flickering on below. Carlyle became acutely aware of Jacob's presence, the warmth radiating beside him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. This is real, Carlyle thought, a mix of awe and unease tightening his chest. And I don't know the rules. I've been thinking, Carlyle said. About work. Jacob glanced at him. That's new. Carlyle shot him a look. Jacob grinned, unrepentant. I want to make changes, Carlyle continued. Not just for us. For the office. For me. Jacob's expression turned thoughtful. Such as? Clear boundaries, Carlyle said. Transparency. If this continues, I won't be your direct supervisor. Jacob's brows rose. You're serious. I am, Carlyle said firmly. I won't let this become something you have to hide, or something that compromises you. The sincerity in his voice made Jacob's throat tighten. Thank you, Jacob said quietly. They turned back to the view. And outside of work? Jacob asked. Carlyle hesitated, then admitted, I don't know how to be doting. Jacob laughed softly. That's probably for the best. Start with being present. Carlyle nodded, committing the words to memory as if they were a boardroom directive. Later, they sat at the small outdoor table, sharing takeaway from a local place Jacob recommended. No suits. No titles. Just them, knees brushing occasionally, laughter slipping out unexpectedly. Carlyle found himself watching Jacob more than the city. "You're smiling," Jacob said, catching him. Carlyle froze. Then exhaled. "Is it that obvious?" "Yes," Jacob said fondly. "You look happy." The word felt fragile. Precious. "I think," Carlyle said slowly, "I've mistaken intensity for fulfillment my entire life." Jacob reached across the table, hesitated, then placed his hand over Carlyle's. Carlyle stilled. No contracts. No expectations. Just choice. He turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together. The contact grounded him in a way nothing else ever had. "I can't promise I'll be easy," Carlyle said. Jacob squeezed his hand. "I'm not asking for easy." They sat like that until the city lights fully claimed the night. The next morning, the office buzzed. Carlyle walked in with his usual precision, but something was different. His voice was warmer. His gaze less guarded. When Jacob arrived, Carlyle looked up immediately. "Good morning," Carlyle said. Jacob smiled. "Morning." The exchange was brief. Professional. But when Jacob handed him his coffee, black, no sugar, Carlyle murmured, "Thank you." People noticed. Weeks passed. Carlyle still ruled the boardroom with sharp intelligence, but he listened more. He corrected without cutting. He left earlier some evenings, sometimes with Jacob, sometimes not, but always with intention. And when they were alone, Carlyle learned new habits. Remembering Jacob's favorite food. Texting instead of calling. Waiting. Listening. Touching with care rather than urgency. One evening, standing by the harbor where the city met the water, Jacob leaned into Carlyle's side. "You've changed," Jacob said softly. Carlyle pressed a gentle kiss to Jacob's temple, unself-conscious and tender. "I wanted to," he replied. "For you." Jacob smiled, resting his head against Carlyle's shoulder. Sydney glittered around them, alive, sprawling, imperfect. And Carlyle Whitmore, once feared and distant, held the man who had quietly reshaped his world, not as a CEO guarding his empire, but as a lover who had finally learned that strength, at its deepest, was found in devotion.